Hello my lovelies and welcome to the Clueless Fangirl YouTube channel. I create content like this, lore videos, live streams and podcasts on Lord of the Ring or rather Tolkien's works on a weekly basis. If you want to follow me on social media, all links are in the description of this video. Enjoy! Hello my lovelies and welcome to a new video. This is about the First Age, part 1 of the First Age video, part 2 coming soon. So following right after the Years of the Trees, the First Age, although comparatively short, it was 590 years long, was a very eventful time for Arda or Middle-earth. When we're talking years and time spans, I think it is important to explain Tolkien uses different measurements for time. Valiant years are mostly used in the time spans beginning with the creation of Arda, through the years of the lamps to the years of the trees. With the rising of the sun, the Valiant year count kind of ends. The creation of Arda is approximately 1,900 Valiant years. The years of the lamps, roughly 1,600 Valiant years, and the years of the trees, around 1,500 Valiant years. There is also another time, the solar years, which are then used from the First to the Fourth Age. This is the time of the years of the sun. One Valiant year is roughly 9,600 solar years. So you get an idea that along the time of the creation of Arda is compared to the time of the years of the sun and the First Age a very long time span. I guess it's a bit like in our time, 100,000 of years for the creation of the earth. Nothing really happens, no human life on the planet, and then boom, mankind appears and things develop in shorter time spans, driven by the human need for more knowledge or more in general. I hope this helps to understand the timeline a bit better and the time, as it can get pretty confusing. So back to our topic, the First Age. Short, but oh boy. You might discover that this is actually my favorite age of all the ages of Arda. All the key players, the places and the battles, everything is there. So let's discuss what happened. Like I mentioned before, the First Age, or as it sometimes is referred to, the Elder Days, began with the rising of the sun and the awakening of men. Let's get a bit deeper into the sun appearing, as this will be a reoccurring theme in Tolkien's work. So after Morgoth and Gondolin destroyed the trees Lorelin and Telperion that lightened the worlds, Lorelin created one last fruit before he died. The Valar Auli then made a vessel to hold the radiance of that last fruit. The vessel then was guided and taken care of by Arian, a Maya. So there was a new astronomical body in the sky above Arda, next to the stars and the moon. Another Maya, the Maya Tillion, was chosen to guide the moon. The names for the sun, amongst others, was Ana or Anor, and the name for the moon was Ithil or Isil. Both seem familiar to you? That's because they are. We can find it in places like Minas Ithil or the province of Ithilien, Minas Anor or the province of Anorion. There are way more examples, and as I said, both the sun and the moon have an important role in Tolkien's work. A last but also interesting fact is that the sword of Elendil, Aragorn's ancestor who cut the ring off of Sauron's finger, was Narsil. It's the same sword Aragorn inherited and then was called Anduril. The name Narsil contains Na and Thil, in Elvish Quenya, fire and white light. So the sword was kind of the embodiment of the two vessels in the sky above Arda. If you're interested in going deeper into the sun and the moon topic, because yes, there is a lot more to learn, let me know in the comments. It's definitely an interesting topic for a video I'd love to make. good. So we covered the first event. Okay, let's go back to the awakening of men. So we learned the rising of the sun and the awakening of men is somehow connected. That implies, and we also learned from the elves who were born before the men awoke, that the elves feel more connected to the moon, or rather the stars. They awoke in Kvivennen under pure starlight. No sun was there. Mankind feels connected to the sun. They are the second children of Ilúvatar, and maybe Tolkien stating the ages after the years of the trees are the years of the sun kind of implies or foreshadows that the time of men has come, and that Ilúvatar's firstborn children are doomed to fade away over time. We can definitely see hints in Return of the King when it's stated that this is now the time of the kings of men, no kings of elves. In Middle-earth, there are no more high kings of the elves. With Gil-galad, the last high king in Middle-earth actually dies. Year 1 of the First Age is also the year Fingolfin and the Noldor that didn't turn back to Aman were slain or went with Fëanor and his sons went over the, I'm sorry to butcher this name, Helcaraxe, the only land passage from Aman to Arda at that time. Many of his followers died during this grueling journey east through the icy wasteland. Years before Melkor and Ungoliant also passed from Aman to Arda through the Helcaraxe, as Melkor knew he wouldn't be safe from Ulmo if he would go overseas. Elenwe, Torgun's wife and Idril's mother, we come later to them, was one of the more known elves that died on that journey, but many still made it through, Galadriel amongst them as one of the more known. A fun thought that always comes to my mind when I hear the name Helcaraxe, which is a very strange name to be fair, is that Hel obviously could refer to hell, and Caraxe reminds me of the German word, yes I'm German, Kraxel, which means climbing through a rough area, so to say. Let's skip a few years and go to the year 50 of the First Age. The Valar Ulmo, lord over the waters and elven friend, told Torgon and his cousin Finrod to build strongholds against Morgoth. Finrod was revealed the hidden realm of Nargothrond and Torgon the valley of Tumladen in their dreams. Both actually really discovered them a few years later in 52 and 53 of the First Age. In the year 60 of the First Age, not long after settling in Middle-earth, Fingolfin, the new High King of the Noldor, started the siege of Angband that lasted almost 400 years. The first battle, the exiled Noldor under the rule of Fingolfin and Madros, Fëanor's eldest son, heir and briefly High King of the Noldor, was the Dagor Bragollach. Short excursion on why Fingolfin was now High King and Madros gave up his birthright after Fëanor, his father, was killed by Gothmog, the Lord of the Balrogs. Madros was captured by Morgoth forces and bound by the wrist of his right hand to the Thangorodrim. Finrod, who had been a friend of Fëanor's sons in the past, found him and freed him by cutting off his right hand, his sword hand again. Madros then proclaimed that the eldest living son of Finwë and his line should inherit the kingship over the Noldor. You can imagine that this caused a lot of friction amongst the Noldor, that after the first king slaying in Aqualonde were now in open conflict with each other. But for now, they had to start and stand united against the forces of Morgoth. A short summary of the Dagor Bragollach would be Morgoth's forces kind of were still in fear of the rising sun and were not that well equipped to fight. Madros passing of the kingship to his step-uncle, his step-uncle's line Fingolfin, united the quarrelling Noldor at least for a while, and with united forces they could overcome Morgoth's forces. Doriath was shot and they refused to take part in any fighting. For the elves, this was the first complete victory over their enemy. The Noldor maintained their guard of Angband. This was the so-called watchful peace. You might have heard that term before. In 102 and 116, First Age, Nargothrond and Gondolin finally were built and rose to power. Like I mentioned, a kind of peaceful time span fell over Arda. And in 305, yes, we skip a lot of time, finally the race of men was discovered by Finrod, the king of Nargothrond and son of Finarfin. I'll include a family tree in here because, yes, it's really, really confusing and they literally all have the same name. He was Galadriel's brother and Torgun's cousin. He was also called Felagund, hinting he was a friend of men, which was the meaning of this. After discovering men, he stayed with them, learned their language, and taught them even Sindarin in exchange. A very touching story and actually one of my favorites, talking about the differences of men and elves, a really, really important topic in the Silmarillion. Talking about mortals and immortals is the story of Finrod and Andreth, the elven king and a mortal woman. Andreth was actually the first mortal to fall in love with an immortal, even before Beren and Luthien. You can find this story in Morgoth's Ring, volume 10 in the History of Middle-earth. It's called Arabeth, Finrod a Andreth. I love these short side stories who exist besides the known books and canon and give a deeper understanding and add actually a lot of value. And on this one, I'll definitely make a video. In 345, we go to Gondolin, where a tragic story of a family ends. Gondolin's king Torgun welcomed his sister Adriel, I'm sorry, butcher the name, and her son Maeglin back home. Unfortunately, it is not a happy family reunion. Aradel left Gondolin years ago to explore Middle-earth on her own. She fell in love with a dark elf named Eol, who lived in the forest of Nan Elmoth. Now, don't get confused with the name Dark Elf. Eol was not evil per se, but he wasn't the typical Tolkien elf, and that's why I love this story so much, and why the time before Lord of the Ring is actually a time where elves and their characters, their deeds and their struggles are explained in a way deeper level than anything we find later. There are elves that struggle with being good and noble, and there are elves that do evil things. So everyone that says elves are not three-dimensional characters and boring should definitely go and read other Tolkien texts besides Lord of the Ring. Back to Eol now. He enchanted Aradel, and here it's not clear to me if she really falls in love with him because he is different and mysterious. She was an adventurer after all, or if he literally made her fall for him by spells, as it is hinted by Tolkien. And whenever unnatural things or spells or force is used in Tolkien's world, it comes with a price, I feel, especially when it comes to love. You later see that in Maeglin and Idril, in Celegorm and Luthien, but also in Ar-Pharazôn marrying his cousin, the last queen of Númenor, by force. None of these stories ever ends good. Anyway, she stayed with him for many, many years, and they had a son, Maeglin. Maeglin and Eol were masterful smiths and friends with many dwarfs, seldom for elves even in those days. Bored of her life in the shadows, Arada wanted to leave and visit her brother in Gondolin. She knew Eol wouldn't allow it, again a very unknown narrative for elves, and so she fled with her son. Eol, knowing where they must have gone, came to Gondolin finally, fully knowing no one was allowed to enter and leave the hidden city. Long story short, trying to kill his ungrateful son and cursing the city as well as his son, Eol kills his wife by accident and was sentenced to death by the city's king Torgun. This marks the beginning of the end of Gondolin, but more on that later. Also, it's kind of foreshadowing that the White Lady of the Noldor falls for the Dark Elf. Just saying, foreshadowing. We jump to the year 455, where two events took place. First, Gil-galad, who you might know from the Lord of the Rings series as the last High King and the leader of the forces of the Last Alliance against Sauron in the Second Age, was born. And second, Morgoth breaking the siege of Angband and the Battle of Dagor Bragollach, the so-called Battle of the Sudden Flame. We can talk about Gil-galad in another video. Let's focus on the battle now. So what happened? After years of peace and holding back his forces, Morgoth's attack on mainly Beleriand came suddenly but forcefully. His Balrogs, followed by orcs, blew Ardgallen and the highlands of Dorthonion up in flames and left basically nothing alive. Led by Glaurung, the first of the Uroloki, they continued their desolation over Maglos Gap and then went straight for Beleriand, as you can see on the map. Maglor, Fëanor's second-born son and keeper of Maglos Gap, fled with the survivors to Himring. In East Beleriand, the brothers Celegorm and Corofin, who was the father of the ring forger Celebrimbor, as well as Maglor's brother, held the pass of Eglon, but due to heavy attacks had to flee south to Nargothrond. Fëanor's fourth son, Carantir, had to flee to Amon Ereb, here on the map, where he and his brother Amrod built the southern defense against the enemy, while their new formatted brothers Maglor and Medros tried to hold the northern borders. Are you confused? Yeah. Orodreth and his elder brother Finrod gathered a large army to help their cousins, but were ambushed and trapped by Morgoth's forces at the fen of Serech. Short backstory to Orodreth, as some might have other information or various informations on his heritage. In earlier versions of the Silmarillion, Orodreth was Angrod's son, and therefore Finrod was not his elder brother but cousin. Tolkien often went back on genealogically and changed the names or the parentage. So in the published Silmarillion, which I personally count as canon, he is Finarfin's son and not his grandson. Back to the battle. Finrod would not have survived this trap if not for the bravery of men, and one in particular. If you always wanted to know the backstory of Aragorn's ring he was wearing, the ring of Barahir, jackpot, this is the story. Barahir was the heir and chieftain to the house of Beor and the father of Beren from the Beren and Luthien story. There were 3 original houses of men that existed from year 1 since the rising of the sun. The houses are the so-called Edain or Atanatari, the fathers of men. The first house was the house of Beor, second was the house of Haleth, and third the house of Marach. Again, let me know in the comments if you would like to know more about the houses of men. I lost count on how many videos that already are, but definitely an interesting and important topic. Countless battles on countless fronts later, almost all of Fëanor's sons were scattered. Fingolfin, the then High King of the Noldor, saw it as his duty to end this grueling war that caused his people devastated losses. And not only in land, but also in lives. He decided to challenge Morgoth, who he thought to be the cowardly hiding one behind his fortresses and behind his forces, and he challenged him to single combat. Fingolfin rode alone on his horse to Angband, and it was told by witnesses they thought Orome the Vala himself rode in unseen anger to the doors of Angband. Morgoth didn't appear at first, so Fingolfin mocked him until the mighty Valar, who called himself King of the World, or Ada, fearful of losing his face in front of his allies and armies, finally showed himself. In my imagination, the duel must have been epic. There's a lot of fan art to be found for exactly this scene, and I try to include 1 or 2 in the video. So the Elven King and the self-proclaimed King of Ada and mighty and probably actually most powerful Valar that ever existed, they began their duel. Fingolfin had his sword Ringil, and Morgoth mainly used his warhammer Grond. What a name, by the way. At first Fingolfin could hold his own, but I mean, we can kind of guess how the story ends. The most powerful Valar against an elf. To show how powerful Fingolfin really was, I should mention he managed to wound the Dark Lord 7 times. Yes, Tolkien loves the number 7. In the end, Fingolfin grew weary and Morgoth managed to beat him to the ground 3 times. Fingolfin stumbled one last time and Morgoth finally managed to step on his neck and he killed the Noldor king. Before he could get a hold of the body and feed him to his wolves, Thorondor, the king of the eagles, shows up. It's very similar to a lot of scenes we know from Lord of the Rings when the eagles finally show up. He slashed Morgoth's face and attacked him and managed to take Fingolfin's body and flew him to a mountaintop near Gondolin, the city his son Torgon built. And with this, the Battle of the Sudden Flame ended. Torgon became the High King of the Noldor, and his father's line from now on passed the kingship and no longer Feanor's line. I want to end with saying Fingolfin is probably, from all Tolkien's works, my favorite elf. Well, close to his cousin Finrod probably. And I know Tolkien states often, as do others, Feanor was the most outstanding elf in the legendarium. And yes, he's a multi-layered character. Not fully good, not fully evil. And he made the Silmarils and the tragedy of the Noldor and the downfall of actually a whole tribe, the Noldor, is caused by his oath. But he actually dies pretty early in the legendarium, in the battle under the stars, the Dagor Bragollach, where he was slain by Gothmog. So he never really even got to the real enemy, Morgoth, whom he sought revenge, but Fingolfin did. So maybe this should tell us all of Finwë's sons and their descendants in the end managed to revenge his death and not the mighty Feanor alone. Another interesting fact, and I'll definitely will make a video on the family tree of the 3 elven tribes, is that Aragorn and Arwen and obviously Elrond are descendants of Fingolfin, not Feanor. His line actually died out with Celebrimbor as his last living grandson. So only Finwë's second and third son's line is still alive in Lord of the Ring and throughout the ages. So here we end part 2 of the First Age, coming soon. Bye my lovelies, and thank you for listening.